sir. I'm here with the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party, and as I have said when I've interviewed him before, I always hate killing his name because people kill my name also. We joked about that earlier. It's carrots, but they see it, they think it's Carez. They hear it, they think it's carrots. So if you want to tell us the proper pronunciation of your name out there for everybody.
I'm Gennady Stolyarov II.
Easier for him to say than me. But so how have you been? Now, we have a new election coming up, 2024, and how do you feel everything is gearing up towards that?
Well, the U.S. Transhumanist Party has been, I think, well ahead of our competition in terms of preparing for this election season, because we actually have a presidential nominee and a vice presidential nominee. Our presidential nominee is Tom Ross, and our vice presidential nominee is Daniel Tweed. And we held our electronic ranked preference primary in May of 2023. And then shortly thereafter, we had the results announced, and Tom was the winner. But Tom very astutely selected Daniel as his vice presidential running mate, and thereby this is a unity ticket for the transhumanist movement, because while Tom secured the majority of the vote, about a third of our members voted for Daniel. And they both have their own distinctive strengths, their own distinctive styles that they bring. I think they work well together as a team. So I was very pleased with this primary, and I think Tom and Daniel are going to bring some important messages to the political discourse that would otherwise be absent. I really see the political field for the mainstream parties as being rather bleak. So Joe Biden wants to run again, even though one might question his fitness for the job simply because of not just his advanced age, but his health conditions that come with that. And he may have the intentions to govern effectively, but of course he may not have the ability. That's the reality of biological aging. And so people behind the scenes, I believe, are making the decisions for Joe Biden, and they're making the decisions in a way that is less than fully transparent or accountable to the American people. On the other hand, Donald Trump, well, we know how his presidency turned out. He's trying to run again. I think he has a certain dedicated base of followers who are going to go with him no matter what. But that is a minority of even the Republican electorate. I think the majority of Republicans are fed up with Donald Trump, and they tolerate him only because they think that he might be able to defeat Joe Biden. And I actually think that among the possibilities for the Republicans and Democrats, the following will happen. If the Republicans nominate not Trump and the Democrats nominate Biden, then not Trump will beat Biden. If the Democrats nominate not Biden and the Republicans nominate Trump, then not Biden will beat Trump. But if it's a Trump versus Biden face-off, then I think Trump will beat Biden. And the reason for that is that most voters' memories are understandably more focused on the short term than the more remote past. So Trump's presidency clearly had its problems, especially once the pandemic set in. And there were a lot of hardships that people endured, as well as a largely ineffectual response to the pandemic by the Trump administration. However, that is going to be 4 years in the past when the election comes around. On the other hand, there are also real hardships that people have experienced during the Biden administration. Rampant price inflation, unlike anything that happened in the past 40 years. So in terms of material prosperity and how most people perceived their day-to-day lives, they were more comfortable under Trump than under Biden. I don't think that's to Trump's credit. I think that just happened to be the state of the economy during the first 3 quarters of Trump's presidency before the pandemic set in. However, I do think that is going to be on a lot of people's minds. We didn't have massive supply chain disruptions under Trump. We didn't have a major war in Ukraine under Trump. And so if it's a Trump versus Biden contest, then I think Trump will squeeze out a victory. There will be factions of the Republicans and the Democrats who are going to be set no matter who their party's nominee is. But those voters who are on the fence and who still want to vote for one of the major party candidates, I think would shift incrementally toward Trump. Now, none of those are outcomes that I would want because I'm not a supporter of either the Democratic or the Republican parties. So my ideal outcome would be for Tom and Daniel to win the White House. But if that doesn't happen, of course, I would favor another third party, probably the Libertarian Party, though I don't know whom they would nominate. I did think that the Jorgensen-Cohen ticket in 2020 was quite strong. We had Spike Cohen, the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party, as our guest for one of our virtual Enlightenment salons. But the Libertarian Party has had a lot of internal divisions, and they've had different factions taking over from time to time. And I think one of the issues is a lot of these factions within the Libertarian Party tend to be very doctrinaire. So they don't really tolerate their fellow libertarians who may be quite close to them on many issues, but they have certain key differences. They may take different positions on some policy matters, or they may have a different philosophical framework behind their libertarianism. And so this can get very acrimonious. Observing the dynamics of the Libertarian Party, I learned a lot in regard to what not to do with the Transhumanist Party, because we follow a philosophy of having a big tent, accepting some of the inevitable differences that would arise, accepting people from all over the conventional political spectrum and people outside the conventional political spectrum, because we need to focus on the issues that really matter, the impact of science and technology on the future of humanity, as well as how we can use reason and the scientific method and long-form discourse rather than sound bites in order to solve these critical problems that our species is saddled with, unfortunately. So I think it will be a rather contentious election season, both within the primaries of each of the major political parties, because I think both Trump and Biden are going to have their challengers, but they're also going to have a very harsh orthodoxy on the side of both Trump and Biden, trying to essentially block any challenge to either of them. But I do think any of the major parties that selects a candidate other than somebody who has already been president will have an edge over the party that doesn't do that. And the Libertarians, if they get their act together, might also put forth a strong challenge. I would say the same for the Greens. I think the problem with the Greens is they don't really seem to have a very good internal decision-making mechanism. I think it's too loosely distributed. And as a result, it seems a bit ineffectual at times. But if they can get their act together and nominate a persuasive and eloquent candidate, they might do well in the election as well. But I think the Ross Tweed campaign is the one to really look out for, because we could make a real difference in terms of what issues get covered, what issues do other candidates then have to focus on because we brought them into the discussion. So that is my hope.
What do you think of things like Pence throwing his hat in, and also Robert Kennedy Jr.? I know some people that are kind of excited about Kennedy Jr. thrown in. What do you think about them, and how that might make the sides say on the tilt or not tilt?
Now, I generally welcome challengers within the major political parties because I think it's healthy to have differences of ideas, differences of policy proposals, and not to be so monolithic. Now, personally, would I vote for Mike Pence? Would I vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? I would say that's a strong no on both counts. Now, Pence and Trump are very different ideologically. Pence is more of a kind of traditional neoconservative Republican. He would have fit in very well with the George W. Bush administration. And he tends to take a more hawkish position on foreign policy than Trump. He's also more socially conservative than Trump, interestingly enough. So Trump may pay lip service to socially conservative causes, but my strong impression is he doesn't really care. He will say what he needs to say in order to get elected or capture a certain constituency, but the true principled social conservatives are not Trump's real constituency. Trump's real constituency are essentially the populists, people from largely the American working class who feel that they're displaced by the modern world in some way. But they're not necessarily as concerned about perceived moral purity as the social conservatives would be. So Pence, of course, served as Trump's vice president. He was often at odds with Trump in terms of policy, but he kind of towed the line while he was in that position. But I think his frustration built up to the point where now he's challenging Trump and he's going to put forward a very different agenda than Trump would. And I think his hope is that a lot of the more traditional Republicans would side with Pence over Trump because there is a lot of Trump fatigue within the Republican camp. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is also very different from Biden. He is definitely left-leaning on economic issues, but he's also less interventionist on foreign policy issues. So he has criticized the war in Ukraine. And Robert F. Kennedy, in terms of the positions that I really dislike of his, is a major skeptic of science and technology and medical advancements. So he has been, of course, a leading critic of vaccines, including vaccines that have a reliable record of safety and efficacy. And I believe if one followed Robert F. Kennedy's recommendations, a lot of the age-old infectious diseases that had been nearly eradicated in principal part because of vaccination would make a resounding comeback. And furthermore, Robert F. Kennedy wants a much more intrusive role for the FDA, and he wants fewer FDA approvals of emerging medical treatments. So that is the opposite of what the Transhumanist Party would stand for. We want an acceleration of FDA review processes, and we want a greater degree of freedom for patients to be able to try experimental medicines, devices, procedures that haven't yet gone through the full 3-stage clinical trial process. So if Robert F. Kennedy wins, I think that would be a huge setback for science and technology. It might be a bit more reasonable on the foreign policy front. So Joe Biden, on the other hand, I would say is stronger in terms of science and technology. I don't really see any of his policies in that regard that were particularly terrible. And I do think he has some good leanings in terms of, for instance, his Biden cancer moonshot and his desire, which I think is genuine, to see cancer defeated because of what happened to his son, Beau. I also think Joe Biden did the right thing, obviously, by signing into law ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Projects Agency in Health, which is the healthcare and medicinal analog to DARPA. So some of the science and technology policy of the Biden administration could lead to incrementally greater progress in medical research going forward. Altogether, it seems to me that the large-scale phenomena that affect most people's lives most directly day to day are not actually dependent on who is in the White House, though the occupants of the White House may often take the credit or the blame for these kinds of phenomena. So clearly, if the mRNA vaccines had succeeded in ending the pandemic, as we all hope that they would in 2021, then the Biden administration would have taken credit for that. And I think in the minds of many people, Biden's popularity would have actually risen as a result of that. However, that didn't happen. Instead, the pandemic lingered on and people kept getting reinfected. Unfortunately, the virus was mutating way too quickly for the vaccines to keep up. And unless there's a universal COVID vaccine that doesn't target the spike protein of the virus, that targets some other components that are not as susceptible to mutation, we are going to get new waves, we're going to get reinfections, and that would mean more disruptions to the economy, more disruptions to people's health. People's lives will continue to be difficult, and when people's lives are difficult, it is a common tendency for them to seek someone to blame. So this is why I think Biden is going to have a difficult time with re-election, no matter what else he might have done, because most people see their lives as more difficult now than they did before the pandemic, and Biden failed to end the pandemic in their minds. Trump, of course, had some disasters of his own during his tenure in office, but there's been enough time and he might be able to say, well, I can fix things. I alone can fix it. And I think some voters might just want a change from the most recent 4 years. Our job in the Transhumanist Party will be to convince those people that they don't need to vote for Trump in order to have change. And they don't need to vote for Biden if they're afraid of Trump. There are other alternatives. And I think, of course, the Transhumanist Party is the best alternative wherever we will be able to get onto the ballot or be eligible as write-ins.
Now, you also mentioned the Green Party, and I do like Howie, but I don't know how he's run before. I think maybe, and this is nothing against Howie, I think the Green Party might need a new face for their person who runs for president also. And that's nothing against Howie. It's just, I think people have seen him and they need a fresh face out there for them to get votes too. I think they do need somebody fresh. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yes. Well, I think Howie Hawkins was a respectable candidate. Certainly, he is a man of principle. When I heard him speak, and I heard him speak live at our open debate in Chicago on March 4th, 2020, shortly before the pandemic, I had the impression that he genuinely believes in what he says, that he would implement the policies that he discussed. If he were elected, at least he would make a genuine effort of doing so. I think my general issue with the Green Party is it focuses so much on a kind of, let's say, consensus-driven governance structure, which is not a bad thing in itself, but it seems to lack that kind of energy and decisiveness that I think a party with more, let's say, clear leadership would exhibit. And I've seen examples of other organizations that tried to be, let's say, excessively decentralized without really having a definitive decision-making mechanism. One example of this is the Transhuman Party, which the US Transhumanist Party actually absorbed in early 2019. And the Transhuman Party was a party of 25 members where explicitly there was no hierarchy. Everybody was ostensibly equal and they had an equal voice in every decision. The problem was, as is almost always the case in such organizations, some people end up doing all the work and others end up essentially freeloading, but expecting that their wishes be fulfilled even if they weren't contributing. And ultimately, the few people who were doing all the work were tired of doing all the work because they had all the responsibility and none of the authority. And the main person who did all the work essentially told me, well, I'm going to abandon this effort, but I can transfer over all of our assets to you, the website, the name, and have you invite the Transhuman Party members who are willing to join the US Transhumanist Party. And that is essentially what I did. Over half of the Transhuman Party members did end up joining us. And there does need to be some sort of very definitive structure that isn't just going to expect people to agree all the time because they're not going to. I think trying to seek consensus is a good thing, but there does have to be a set of decision rules. And I think the Green Party is just too loosely organized for that. I think it's probably run more smoothly than the Libertarian Party at this point, because it doesn't have all of these takeovers and recriminations to the same extent. But there have been instances in the past of even transhumanists joining the Green Party and being disappointed because they didn't really see a clear way by which the Green Party could advance an innovative set of proposals, like anything to do with technology to actually improve the environment or improve human well-being, would face a lot of skepticism within the Green Party, because a lot of Green Party members are these, let's say, dark green environmentalists as distinguished from bright green environmentalists. So the bright green environmentalists believe that technology can be used to improve the environment and also improve human well-being. The dark green environmentalists just see humanity as a blight on nature and want to limit human influence.
That is a good point, and I have to admit, even myself as an environmentalist, sometimes I'm afraid that the human race is like locusts, and I support space travel and exploring, and sometimes I'm afraid we're going to be like a swarm of locusts and just eat up all the resources on planet and then just go to the next one and do the same thing and just keep moving. So sometimes I have that fear of the dark green also, but hopefully that's not true. Hopefully that doesn't happen, and we wake up and prevent ourselves from doing that. Now, we have our candidates, the transhumanist candidates. We have Tom Ross, and if people want to learn more about Tom, other than here, I have 3 interviews with him on OSH Radio here, and 1 since he's become the candidate, and 2 from in the past. And I also have an interview with Daniel Tweed, and all very interesting. I like Tom as a candidate. Now, I'll let you say now, as far as the Transhumanist Party, if, let's say, as the dark horse, as the underdog, the Transhumanist Party did win, what do you think that will bring to our country in our leadership and in advantages for everyone? What do you think that'll be?
I think it would revolutionize the way politics is conducted, because Tom's focus has been on a very collaborative approach to decision making. So he has stated, instead of having debates, he wants to have roundtables. He wants to invite people whom he might have been in competition with to serve on his cabinet. He wants to designate a new cabinet position called the Singularity Secretary. And he also wants to emphasize important emerging issues such as artificial intelligence, but in a manner that is constructive, so that people do not fear AI, but they rather see the opportunity inherent in AI, and they see their own unique human skill sets as not being replaceable by AI, but as being complementary to AI, so that they could see ways in which AI could actually help them discover what is truly unique about them as humans and about them as individuals. So there would be more focus on technology being used to solve pressing societal issues. And there would be more focus on bringing people into the political conversation in constructive ways so that they might be free to contribute from a broad range of perspectives, and they wouldn't be seen as the enemy. They wouldn't be alienated simply because of where they happen to fall on the conventional political spectrum. I think this is extremely important in today's hyper-polarized environment where people are often pigeonholed based on their positions on a fairly narrow set of issues, what are often called the wedge issues, even though that's really a minority of the issues facing Americans today. And hopefully with Tom Ross and Daniel Tweed in the White House, they would be able to achieve a broadening of focus so that people could really look at, well, how could technology solve the societal and the economic problems of today? How could it solve any issues between humans and AI? How could we arrive at the proper complementary interactions between humans and AI? How can we effectively promote medical research? How can we prevent problems like child exploitation and human trafficking that Tom often likes to emphasize as being extremely important but unsolved problems that we may need to harness technology in order to overcome. And Daniel's focus is substantially on decentralized solutions that don't require government, but that could have the encouragement of prominent public figures, collaborative citizen science solutions, or voluntary communities that can form for the purpose of solving certain problems. And I think this combination of ideas can be quite powerful. It's certainly a different combination of ideas than any other political party would put forward. But unlike many of the other political parties, we would not completely shut off our political opponents from having some say in the decision-making process. We would not inherently label someone as unworthy of participating, and hopefully that would increase their willingness to actually work collaboratively with us transhumanists.
While you were talking about it, I was thinking of it, especially when you were saying there about collaborating. I think it would be interesting, too, for a third party to actually get into the White House. And then because the third party would not have a controlling share in anything else. I mean, you always talk about the House and everything and who's in power, the Republicans or the Democrats, and how they vote. But if you had a third party get into the White House, it would be interesting because then the other parts of the government wouldn't necessarily have anybody from that party in them, necessarily, let alone a controlling share, or so it would be interesting how that would function and how they would if it would be it would be an interesting situation. Let me put that. I'm not sure it would be totally difficult, but it would be interesting how they would deal if they try not to work with the third party in the office, or if they would be more open to dealing with them because they're from neither side. That would be an interesting thing. I would hope they'd be more open, since the person in the presidential office would be of a third party on either side. But that is an interesting situation. So going into this, what do you think would be the now I'd asked Tom this. So what do you think would be the most important things for maybe Tom, if he got into office, to actually kind of spearhead within his first, they always say the first 100 days or so. What do you think would be the most important for him to do as the first transhumanist in the position of president of the United States?
Well, in the first 100 days, it seems to me the policies that are easiest, swiftest to implement with the greatest impact should be the ones that are pursued. So, for example, some sort of rational baseline for how to approach AI. I think there's a danger of a fear-driven reactive approach toward AI, but a Tom Ross presidency would not do that. So even by convening discussion groups or committees that would actually look at the issue of AI from a reason-based rather than a fear-based standpoint, and yes, consider the risks, but also consider the benefits, use the proactionary principle rather than the precautionary principle. That could do a lot of good to shift the discourse on AI, which is predominantly right now fueled by doomsaying. Another important initiative would be the Singularity Secretary cabinet position that Tom could designate, and that could dovetail with the discussions on AI, but it would also involve discussions on other emerging technologies. And furthermore, there could be efforts to liberalize the process of review and approval for medical technologies, because the executive branch, of course, contains the FDA, and the president would have some influence over how the FDA does its work. And that influence could take a number of, let's say, forms. It's even possible to accelerate the review process by ensuring that the FDA is better staffed so that there are more people actually looking at applications. That's an initiative that could be undertaken very quickly. Now, in terms of education, I think that could also be implemented very quickly. Tom has spoken about AI tutors as one of his initiatives. And I think today it's possible to implement AI tutors for a lot of people. And if through the Department of Education, another executive branch agency, Tom and Daniel are able to roll out an initiative, for instance, to get every student in the public school system an AI tutor. That would help significantly. The US Transhumanist Party, of course, supports maximal use of technology in both public and private school settings in order to maximize the benefit of education and reduce the cost of education. Unfortunately, right now, for many students, especially in the public school system, there's not enough individualized attention that's paid to them. There's a kind of one-size-fits-all approach where the teacher generally is compelled to teach to the lowest common denominator. And students who want to move ahead or who have their own interests, their own curiosities, often feel stifled in that kind of environment. But what if each of them had a personalized tutor, a system that could gauge where they are and give them individualized guidance and an individualized curriculum? I think that could revolutionize education for the next generation. So those kinds of initiatives, along with shifting the public discourse. Imagine a president who openly speaks in favor of technological advancement, in favor of life extension, in favor of the implementation of technology as a way to solve societal problems. That would be an entirely new kind of discourse compared to what politicians have engaged in. And it would be a discourse that is forward-looking, that seeks to anticipate and create a better future rather than a destructive discourse about how bad one's opponent is.
Yeah, I like that. There's some good ideas there, and the education idea is very important. I for a short time had gone from public school to a private school, and I don't mean a religious school, I mean actual private school for a little while. And going from a class of 40 to a class of 5 to 10 makes a big difference in the education for a child learning, because you get more attention. And if they can have AI tutors or systems that could help them learn, that would be great, because a lot of times the true potential of the child isn't realized because they don't get the attention. And that is a pity. And you wonder, I've often thought that in anything, sometimes the people that get the places are not necessarily the best. They're just the people that everything fell in place for. Sometimes might have been better people that had gotten lost behind just through the system. And I think this would help that not to happen. So that is very important. Well, I like a lot of the ideas you had today. I try to let these things not run too long. But I'm real interested. The first in the beginning of the interview, when you mentioned of, if this person, Biden ran against this person, and this person ran against, I really like some of those ideas. Those were great, and I'd like to see how this progresses. And as before, I would like to do a couple of these with you, and as we get closer and closer to the election, see how things are changing and discuss that again. And last time, I think we discussed things after the one election also. So I'd like to do that again, if that's good with you. I think it's a nice way, and I wish Tom and Daniel the best here. And I mean, I always hope that the Transhumanist Party keeps growing. And I think if anything, though, it's good for us to let people know there are options out there than the big two. And, I don't know if, like last time when I had run, you don't know if people are going to pay attention. We did get some votes, though, last time for our last candidate, which was great. And I think we got to keep moving ahead. And people are going to realize there's other options out there. And hopefully it makes a difference and people hear some of the things. And even if, even if Tom or Daniel don't get elected, if the ideas they have are also heard, and the ideas of the Transhumanist Party are heard, and maybe are absorbed and combined or used as advisors, I think that in itself would be great and help our government and our politics as it is. But I mean, I do hope we keep moving forward with this, and I think we're making a lot of progress. Like I said to Daniel when I interviewed him, I think, last time we had more candidates that tried to be the U.S. Transhumanist one, but I think this time we had quality, not quantity. Yes. Not saying that we didn't have some good candidates last time, but I think this time we had quality over quantity. And I think that was good. I liked the two running mates. And I'm looking ahead to see how this all works out and goes. And thank you for your ideas. And we'll progress and talk again within a certain amount of months and see how things are going. Who knows what could happen? I heard that Jon Stewart was even thinking of throwing his name into the hat. So that's interesting too. But then again, you sometimes worry if people aren't just going to throw their name in and it's going to kind of dilute it and not really help. You know what I mean? It might, but we'll see how this goes. It's interesting. There's a lot of moving parts this election all around, and it'll be real interesting. But thank you for being with us again, and I'll put the information down below about the party and everything, and we'll get together real soon again and talk more. How's that sound?
That sounds good. And I do think it would be fascinating to essentially check in every few months to see how this election season is unfolding and to discuss how my predictions have fared and updated predictions that I might have.
You can be like the amazing Karnak or the amazing Kreskin. You can make your predictions. I am seeing. So maybe there'll be a new role for you in the future.
Maybe so.
Political guru or forecaster. Well, all right, then. Well, thank you again, and we will talk real soon.
All right. Live long and prosper.